Hi, I'm Tony Lair. In this video, I'll be showing you how to use the shading and blending technique with EcoFlow leather dyes to color a fall oak leaf. First, set up your workspace. You will need good quality, small, round, fine point natural or synthetic brushes. I prefer number 4 sables. Ideally, you should use a separate brush for each color group. Color code the brush ends with electrical tape and keep them in a rack or container when not in use. You will also need a container of clean water, a dye palette, eyedroppers, paper towels, and practice leather pieces cut from the same leather as your project. For more information on supplies and help with setting up your workspace, see our video, Setting Up a Workspace for Background Dyeing, Shading Blending Technique, and Detail Work. Select from 16 pre-mixed EcoFlow leather dyes or mix them together for custom colors. I've selected dark cocoa brown for the background, twig, and acorn cap. Sunshine yellow for a base color on the leaf. Canyon tan for the acorn, twig, and leaf. Forest green for the leaf, and scarlet for the final leaf. Dyes can be diluted with water to produce any color or hue you will need. I want the background around my leaf to be dyed dark. I normally do this first so I won't be distracted by dyes bleeding onto the background area while I'm adding color to the design, but you can do background dyeing as a final step if you prefer. I'm using full-strength cocoa brown leather dye. Use an eyedropper to transfer dye from the bottle to a dye palette. Be sure you do this away from your project to avoid accidental spills. I'm using a round number 4 fine point sable brush. Dip the tip 1/2 way into the dye. Touch the tip to a paper towel and then a piece of practice leather to remove excess dye and to form a tip on the brush. Always begin in the center of a backgrounded space. Then work towards edges and into corners. Learn to control the dye's natural tendency to bleed. Let the project dry a few minutes before continuing. Add another coat if necessary until the desired color is achieved. For more on background dyeing, see our video, The Basics of Background Dyeing. When coloring any project with leather dyes, remember to always follow the basic coloring rule of thumb. Work light to dark. You can darken light areas, but you cannot lighten an area that's been dyed dark. My lightest color is yellow, so first I'm going to apply a base coat of full-strength sunshine yellow leather dye over the entire leaf design. I'm using the wet brush technique. This technique involves applying dye with a heavily loaded brush to obtain the most even or full use of the dye tone. Dip your brush 1/2 way into the dye. Touch the tip of the brush to a piece of paper towel to remove excess dye. Then touch a practice piece of leather to form the tip. Apply the dye to your design, covering the entire leaf. Then let it dry completely. Next, I want to apply Canyon Tan in 3 different hues using the Shading with Diluted Hues technique. Transfer dye from the bottle to a dye palette with an eyedropper. Use a separate clean eyedropper for the water. For the lightest mixture, I'm using 1/4 dye to 3/4 water. The middle mixture is 2/3 dye to 1/3 water. The darkest hue is full-strength dye. Test your dye mixture formulas on a piece of practice leather, the same leather you used on your project. Allow mixtures to dry completely so you can see their true color. Use the lightest mixture to map out all areas of the twig and acorn. Then add the lightest Canyon Tan mixture to the leaf. Establish a light direction in your mind. Where the imaginary light source hits your design will be the lightest hue. The opposite side will be the darkest. Remember, let the dye dry completely between applications so you can see the true colors. Now I'm adding the middle mixture of Canyon Tan. Remember the light directions. Enhance shadowed areas where small veins in the leaf connect to the large central vein. Now I'm adding full-strength canyon tan using the dry brush technique to intensify the shadows and add more detail. Dry brush shading involves removing most of the dye from a brush, then stroking the brush lightly over the surface of a design, allowing only a very small amount of dye to penetrate into the leather. The established light direction needs to be followed. Let the project dry completely so you can see the true colors. The leaf looks complete, but I want to add more color. Next, I want to apply forest green in 3 different hues. Be sure to use separate eyedroppers for the dye and clean water. For the lightest mixture, I'm using 1/4 dye to 3/4 water. The middle mixture is 2/3 dye to 1/3 water. The darkest hue is full strength dye. Test your dye mixture formulas on a piece of practice leather. Allow mixtures to dry completely so you can see their true color. Apply the lightest hue first. Use this lightest mixture to map out all areas of the leaf that will be colored with the different mixtures of forest green. I'm using a combination of the dry and wet brush techniques. Turn your project for easier access to all spaces. Now I'm adding the middle mixture of forest green to intensify the shadows and form of the leaf. Remember the light directions. For more detail and enhanced shadows, I'm adding full-strength forest green using the dry brush technique. Let the project dry completely so you can see the true colors. Then add more dye if necessary. Now I want to shade the stem, acorn, and add more depth to the shadows. I'm going to mix a light hue of cocoa brown, then use full strength. Again, use separate clean eyedroppers for the dye and water. For the light mixture, I'm using 1/4 dye to 3/4 water. The darkest hue is full strength dye. I tested the mixtures on a piece of practice leather and let them dry to make sure the hues are correct before continuing with the coloring. Apply the diluted light mixture first over acorn, cap, and twig. Now I'm adding full-strength cocoa brown using the dry brush technique to intensify the shadows and to add depth. Remember light direction. Flatten the tip of the brush to get into small spaces or use a smaller brush. Let the project dry completely so you can see the true colors. Then add more dye if necessary. Finally, I want to apply scarlet in 3 different hues. Use separate eyedroppers for the dye and water. For the lightest mixture, I'm using 1/4 dye to 3/4 water. The middle mixture is 2/3 dye to 1/3 water. The darkest hue is full strength dye. Again, I tested the dye mixture formulas on a piece of practice leather and allowed them to dry completely so I could see their true colors. I'm applying the lightest mixture first. Add this light mixture to map out where you want the scarlet to accent the leaf. Next, I'm adding the middle mixture of scarlet to intensify the shading. And finally, I'm adding full-strength scarlet using the dry brush technique to intensify the color and add accents to the leaf. Let the project dry completely so you can see the true colors. Then add more dye if necessary. Remember that in nature, every leaf is colored differently. Be creative with your coloring. Experiment. Mix different dyes together to create custom colors and dilute them with different proportions of clean water for unique, distinctive shades and blends. Protect your finished project by applying a top coat finish such as satin sheen, super sheen, or super sheen spray. For more information about coloring using EcoFlow products, see our book Coloring with EcoFlow and our how-to videos.